And one of the things, I'll bring it up now because people might wonder, we didn't have this listed as a thing to discuss tonight, but they might wonder, well, if the fish were out there in the ocean, you got freshwater and saltwater fish.
Right.
If this is really a global flood, you're going to blend all that water and some of them aren't going to make it. So if that's true, how did they survive? Second thing is, why do I still have freshwater and saltwater areas on the earth? If this whole thing was covered, shouldn't it all be the same salinity? So it's pretty simple.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the It Stands Written podcast. My name is Braden. I have Gavin with me, and we also have Elijah, and Ernest is back for the first time in a while. Ernest,
my grand return.
He is back.
Hello.
Awesome.
I know you've all missed me very much.
Yes, I have myself as well.
I haven't. Let's go. Thanks a lot.
Okay. So we figured to conclude this creation versus evolution series, we would do kind of a Q&A. I know, Ernest, you had a few questions. We're going to bring some questions to Gavin, just talk about them a little bit. And then also listeners, if this brings up any more questions that you might have, you can always email those to us, and we'd love to answer you guys directly. So we're just going to get started. I've got the first question, and Gavin, I know you've had this question a lot, but the question is about carbon dating. So it's a method of dating objects called carbon dating, where you can see how old it is by how much carbon it has. You can get into more details of that, but go ahead and explain what that is.
Well, depending on the object, first off, when someone says that an object has been carbon dated, if the object they're referring to isn't one that was once living, you can just stop them right there and say you have no idea what you're talking about. Carbon dating is not there to date rocks, contrary to popular belief. It's not there to date anything that wasn't once living, because essentially it's supposed to tell you when the clock started from the death of that animal and only forward. And here's how it works. Carbon-14 and nitrogen, carbon and nitrogen, as to say, are very close to one another in a periodic table. High up in the atmosphere, when the sun interacts with these atoms, you can excite them into carbon-14. Okay, nitrogen becomes carbon-14, and it has a decay rate, meaning there is a certain speed that it's going to lose 50%. We refer to that as a half-life of its parent atoms into what they refer to as daughter atoms. So essentially carbon-14 decays, and on about 5,730 or so year intervals, you'll have half as much as you started with. Not exactly that. This is a probabilistic kind of thing, but that's approximately what you're going to get. So the idea is carbon-14 is something that plants inhale. Okay, they take it in. Now we eat plants, and that's how we get it. Or we eat animals that have eaten plants, and that's another way that we get it. So ultimately, everything should be roughly the same percentage of this in the atmosphere. And that number is a small number. It is currently, and maybe rising just a teeny bit, 0.000765%. Okay, so we're like way down the decimal places here. That's how much of it exists as opposed to, anything else in our atmosphere. It's a very small fraction of what we breathe. Since you will die and you will stop eating when you do, you're going to stop taking in carbon-14. And if you've been dead according to the clock 5,700 years, you should have half as much as that 0.000765 I referred to a moment ago. So the idea is you should be able to compare the amount of parent and daughter atoms to know how much time it has had to decay.
Doesn't that run off the assumption? Wouldn't you have to know the amount of carbon atoms the living creature had in it when it died?
Yep.
Like if you take two squirrels and they both supposedly died 2,000 years ago, but one squirrel had more carbon than the other squirrel, then your timeline's completely thrown off, right?
Well, it would be. The thing is, there is actually an assumption that's built in. It's not that one. We think that everything is pretty close to that number. However, things that are in the water, certain parts of certain animals are different than things that are on land. For example, you can have a woolly mammoth where its skin is going to date 10,000 years younger or older than its bone. That's a problem.
That is a problem.
So, yes, it is possible that two animals have a different amount in them, but we assume it to be pretty close since we're ingesting the same thing. Here's where the assumption is. And actually, you know what? Let's back up for a second. Prior to carbon-14 dating, what was our dating methodology? Okay. Before that, we can go back to 1830. Maybe a little earlier, in fact, where they started saying around that time that the Earth and the universe were billions of years old, using big numbers, okay? And around that time was something that came about known as the geologic column. So you guys would be familiar with this from your high school textbooks, which is basically a picture of a cutaway view of a mountainside, and in it you have distinct layers of rock, and each one has its index fossil and its age, and it goes, Mesozoic, Archaeozoic, Paleozoic, so on. You got Jurassic, Triassic, whatever. They break down these different layers, and in them you're supposed to be able to know how old things are. So the geologic column was created, and it was dated, and they said each layer has an age, each layer has an index fossil.
Wait, how did they date the layers?
Good question. How did they do it? Answer is they picked the numbers out of thin air.
Really?
They picked the numbers out of thin air. Now, what's interesting about this is, and you can find, they said, here's our guess. Okay, this is written down. The wild thing is all the radiometric or radioisotope, as some people correct me for not calling it the right thing, dating methods all agree with the geologic column. I think, well, that's pretty amazing. How did they guess it correctly? Well, I'm going to explain that in just a second. They didn't guess it correctly. They have no idea how old it is. The short is they reject the results that defy the that defy the geologic column, and keep the ones that fit their religion, because that's what evolution really is, and this old Earth idea. So let's explain the assumptions that are built into why this thing has never and will never work. Okay, in our atmosphere, carbon-14 is being created at a faster rate than it's decaying. So best analogy I was given for this was the idea that if you had a garden hose and you were filling up a barrel of water, okay, with the water from the hose, and there are holes drilled in the side of the barrel going from the bottom to the top, eventually those holes, depending on their size and the flow rate, you're going to hit equilibrium, right? The first one starts to leak. If the flow rate's high enough, the second one will start to, and so on, third, fourth, fifth. But at some point, they're going out of the system as quickly as water is being put into the system. Now, for comparison's sake, our atmosphere is taking in carbon-14 at a faster rate than it's leaking it out.
And where's it getting the carbon-14 from?
From high atmosphere when the sun collides with these nitrogen atoms.
Yeah.
So what happens is we have not quite met equilibrium in our atmosphere yet. At the point where we've completely saturated it, it would be a good starting point to say, okay, anything that dies today, right, we know it's saturated. It can't become any more carbon-14 than it is. We could start doing that math pretty carefully. The problem is we haven't reached that yet. And they say, well, wait a second, how long would it take to reach equilibrium? Well, about 30,000 years. This is a good young Earth creation argument, so I'm glad the carbon dating people looked into it. This actually proves our case. It doesn't hurt us at all. Okay.
How do they answer that?
They ignored it. What they did is they said, we already know. Initially, they ignored it. Now they haven't really had an answer for it, because initially they said, well, we already know that the Earth is millions of years old. So they started out with an assumption that they called a fact.
Right.
And since it's that old, we don't have to worry about the equilibrium problem. But as the years have gone by, they go, yeah, this is kind of a problem. Okay, not to mention, if it's increasing, we would expect anything to have less than it does now, simply because it's still increasing with time, right? Now, since carbon-14 has this 5,700-year half-life, you can't just keep losing forever and still have it be detectable. Okay, at some point, it becomes so small, they're having a very hard time making the case for this, even if you ignore all the things that we shouldn't be ignoring. Okay. And what happens is it becomes so small that you might get a very low reading on a Geiger counter. It would be, for example, they call the little click you hear under a Geiger counter when you put something in it that's radioactive, they call those clicks disintegrations. Okay. And a DPM, or disintegrations per minute, is what they're looking at. And they're listening to, really. And they say, okay, and someone can Google this to find out. I'm using an example, don't know the number off the top of my head, but I think it's somewhere around 12 disintegrations per minute you'd expect to get from an object that is freshly dead, C14. If I put my hand, for example, still living under the Geiger counter, I should get that many clicks. If I got 6 clicks per minute, then I've had one half-life go by. We only have that many daughter atoms left. Now, over the years, they have improved this useless science by saying we've made sure not to cross-contaminate things. We've been really careful about our specimens and how we handle them, getting them there to make sure that nothing from us is rubbing off on them, blah, blah, blah. And the problem is the counter sounds like this. It goes click, 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 click. It's very unpredictable because these things are somewhat randomized. Now, you might say, okay, well then let's say you take a reading and you get 11 disintegrations in that minute. And then you take another reading, and the next minute you just get 8. Which one's correct? You might say, well, Gavin, wouldn't you just do it 100 times or so and then average the total?
Sure.
You would think so, because that would actually make a lot more sense, but that's not how they do it. They take the results, say 10 different tests on the same specimen, all with widely varying results, and they compare it to the geologic column. They say, which of these wouldn't fit? Well, let's see. This one puts it too young. This one puts it too old. Oh, here's the answer we're looking for, and they choose that as the correct one. Their circular reasoning used all the way back to the geologic column is complete nonsense. If you said to someone, how do you know the layer's age? The answer they would actually give you, Ernest, would be to say, well, you know the age of the layer by the index fossil that's found in it. You might say, okay, next question.
Where's the fossil?
Yeah, how did you figure out the age of the fossil? I say, very good question. The answer is it's dated by the layer that it's found in. That's circular reasoning. Mm-hmm. And we have adhered to this in carbon-14. Now, there are many examples. You've got sea snails that are alive going across, where the Geiger counter is clicking so fast. It's like they haven't even been born. Somehow they're like preeminent. Okay, those things are 26,000 years. It doesn't make sense. They've got these numbers that make no sense. 26,000-year-old things that are still walking around. You've got different parts of the same animal tasting differently. And not to mention, when you dig deep and you go down through the Carboniferous era, as they would call it, which is basically, according to Flood, pretty simply where you had a whole lot of squished plants to make coal. Mm-hmm. This area is supposedly millions, 250 plus million years old. Now remember, humans, according to their theory, only showed up in the last 3 million or so years. The problem is they find skulls beneath that. And they go, wait a second, maybe there's an explanation for this. Maybe someone buried it there. No, that wasn't it. It didn't make sense within the surroundings. What is it? Mm-hmm. Gosh, I don't know. Could it be that maybe it's not 250 million years old? Mm-hmm. Perhaps these people got hydrologically sorted along with the dirt and everything that surrounded them. Perhaps you want to be afraid of God, so you don't end up like that person.
That can't possibly be.
It couldn't possibly be, because it would only affirm that the Bible is true. Right. We can't allow that, because one day we'll be judged. The other thing that they find in the Carboniferous era is it's not an era, but in that layer is they find radioactive carbon-14. It shouldn't be there, right? How many half-lives do you have to get down to? And they go, it's just abundant. It's everywhere. Okay, apparently carbon-14 was something that was around before the flood, around 6,000 years ago, not 250 million. Mm-hmm.
So what that would mean is either the carbon dating is correct and everything is very young, or the carbon dating is useless and you can't use it. Either way.
The portion of the carbon dating that they're ignoring by saying that the saturation problem really shouldn't be a problem is the part that shows us that, in fact, the Earth is young. Because even if they were off by 10x, let's say it's 300,000 years before they hit equilibrium. Okay, I'll take it. I don't want to really fight with them about this. The point is, it is so far from what they're claiming it needs to be, it makes no sense. And the only time they'll accept answers is when it fits the geologic column. Now, here's the other thing. There have been people who have tested this to see, they go in and they say, here's a bone, we'd like you to test it. What was the answer you got? Well, we got anywhere from 10,000 one result to 27,000. Do you know anything about where it came from? Why does that matter? Well, we need it for calibration purposes. Okay. Well, forget it. I'll just tell you this. It came out of my backyard. That's a dinosaur you just tested. So there shouldn't be any carbon-14. Well, we wouldn't have tested if we had known that. Exactly. Because you didn't know the answer that you wanted. Why did you charge me $400 for it? Okay. But that's okay. It only takes $400 to prove how stupid these people are. So if you have spare money, do it sometime. Yeah. Now, the geologic column, let's just talk about that for 1 second and we'll move on. Where would you go if you were a student of geology, saw this thing and thought, I see these drawings in my textbook. Where could I actually go to visit it and see this thing cut out of a hillside in its glory? The answer is your textbook. It doesn't exist. Now, for anybody who's listening and goes, well, that's kind of a bold statement. Okay, pause here, go to Google, type in geologic column, and you will scroll through hundreds of pictures of drawings of a geologic column. You will not find one photograph because the whole thing was theoretical. So not only was it made up and the numbers were made up, we were calibrating our C14 based on that. And by the way, if anybody has questions about other dating methods that are also radiometric or radioisotope dating, they fail for the same reasons. Some of them use bigger numbers, some use smaller numbers, right? You've got a good example, in fact, potassium argon dating for dating rock, actually dead material that was never once living. Back in the 80s, you had St. Helens blew up, right? Well, go ahead and test their rock. Guess what? It turns out it was last molten like billions of years ago. We know it was in 1980. This thing needs to be thrown in the trash.
I remember hearing about that.
Yeah.
No.
What about the people who are like, what if you like at the Grand Canyon or whatever, doesn't that look very layery?
There's a lot of rocks in Arizona that have that, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So you're looking at stratification. What they don't do is follow the pattern of the geologic column. What they do is they follow the pattern of what we'd expect to see if they were hydrologically sorted. 2 different weights of sand inside of a jar of water, shaken up, set down, watch it just stratify right there in front of you. It takes about an hour.
Yeah, that's true.
Nothing to it.
Yeah.
It's a good overview for carbon dating for us. Gavin, thanks.
Yeah, sure thing.
So
Ernest, you had a question, right?
I did. I had a question. So I don't know if I've heard this objection very often before, but it's the objection of so if you look at the description, days 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all of the stuff's created. Day 6, Adam is created, and then if you read chapter 2, which is the parallel version, chapter 2 says you had Adam created, then God brought all of the animals to Adam. Adam named them all. And then after Adam named them all, there was no one found suitable for Adam. So Adam gets put to sleep, Eve gets created end of day 6. But Adam would have had to name thousands. Like if you look at the number of animals on the ark from like Answers in Genesis or someone, I think they estimate like 10,000 animals. He would have had to name 10,000 animals in a single day. Was he just like motor mouth naming them all just one after another, or what was that situation like?
Yeah, so the number of seconds in a day is a little over 80,000, right? And so if he could say a name every couple seconds, he has plenty of space to fit it all into the same day. Okay, now remember, this guy was speaking, walking, talking from the day of creation, unlike us who have an experience starting, from the womb to be raised and fed and can't speak for a year or two and have to learn all kinds of things. This guy was pre-programmed with language. In fact, this may be the only human just comes to mind that was ever pre-programmed with a language, right? And so for him, it wouldn't have been hard to look at something and go, dog, giraffe, cat, fish, tree, bird, whatever, that kind of thing, just for a few minutes straight, And honestly, if he's going at that speed, he could do it in a lot less time. It's not species. I just want to keep in mind that he was naming, it was kinds. So going back to our first episode, kinds are basically the large categories. I might say dog would be a good example. Species might be Chihuahua, Great Dane, Poodle, Doberman, that kind of thing. I don't think he got down to that level. I don't know. I wasn't there, but even if he had to, it wouldn't be the end of the world. The point is, there was also probably less speciation on day one than there is now. Pretty clear those things are going to be more broad. So I feel like, in a way, he would have had a lot less to name in one sense. But even if that number is between 7,000 to 10,000, he still has enough time to do it in one day. Now, the other thing you were bringing up is the accounts, and hopefully I'm not getting the cart before the horse here.
Yeah. We talked about this separately off the podcast, but This is a good question of like Genesis 1 and 2. So if you look at, actually, let me just pull it up and read the exact text. So of course, Genesis 1, everyone's familiar with, walks you through the 6 days of creation. But Genesis chapter 2, starting in verse 5, says, when no bush of the field was yet in the land, and no small plant of the field had yet sprung up, for the Lord God had not caused it to rain on the land, and there was no man to work the ground, and a mist was going up from the land, and was watering the whole face of the ground. Then the Lord God formed man from the dust of the ground, and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living creature. Seems to say that when there was no small plant of the field, then God created man, which seems to contradict chapter 1, where it says plants are created, and then several days later, Adam and Eve are created.
So the question is that Genesis 1 is clearly a chronological account of the creation. Right. Genesis 2 either contradicts or seems to be, by intent, by the author, not a chronological account of the creation.
Let me make it real simple. And again, I get all these things from somebody else. I want to take credit for a great answer. It's very simple. It's chapter 1 is a headline. Chapter 2 is a description. Okay. So for example, if you were looking at an article in a newspaper that said a family of 6 veered off the road and crashed and they all died. And you go, wow, that's some headline. You start to read it. It says, this family of 6 was driving down the highway on Sunday morning. You say, wait a second, they're dead. How could they be driving down the highway? I just read that they were dead. Yeah. You go, bro, you're kind of not reading this correctly. That's what's going on there. He's giving a more detailed account of what happened, and he's zooming in on particular characteristics. So that's all that there is to it.
Yeah. Let's see here. I have the next question, and this would go a little further forward in Genesis regarding the ark. So my question is with Noah and the ark is, how did they fit we know the ark was big, but how did they fit all of the animals into the ark? And what about the tons and tons of species that we have now?
Sure. So let's talk about how it's described in the Bible. So it's actually not just 2 of a kind all the way through. There's actually places he took 7 of a kind in others. So if you look at that, you think that makes the question even harder to answer. It's really not. So the dimensions that are given paint a picture for us of a very large ark. Okay. And in it, if you had, for example, a Tyrannosaurus, he's going to take up a whole lot of space unless he's a baby. You know how much space he takes up as a baby? About the size of a football. You just need a pink one and a blue one. That's it. Okay. And then everything's going to be okay. So first off, I don't think it would have been wise for him to bring large animals of each kind, but small ones. Right. It would also make sense that they would be smaller because if they're younger, their opportunity to increase, to multiply, is greater than if they're past their prime.
Oh, yeah.
The other thing is, I don't think he had to run around looking for them. In fact, the Bible talks about these animals basically coming to him. God kind of directed this and had a lot to do with it. Yeah. And so it wasn't like Noah would have had to apply all his own wisdom to make this happen. Right. Now, again, we go back to species versus kind. He asked them to bring 2 of the kinds, but he excluded a few. He didn't tell them to bring anything that was dwelling in the water because it would have been just fine. Okay, fish survive flooding pretty well, right? You know what else does is insects. Insects didn't have to come on the ark because insects also survive flooding very well.
Really?
Okay. Yeah, you look at flooded areas and when the water goes down, insects are just everywhere.
Wow.
Okay, this is a big thing.
But would they be able to survive for, what was it, like almost a year that they were?
However many days it was. Yeah, some things can just be dormant for a long time. And I'm not really good on the details of it, so I won't pretend to have a perfect answer there. But yeah, they can be there for a while.
And some could have crawled on the ark in between the slats and stuff.
To be fair, this is the thing. Insects are not they're real small.
They don't
you
take
can
up any
shove them all
space
in
at
a
all.
tiny corner.
Yeah. And one of the things, I'll bring it up now because people might wonder, we didn't have this listed as a thing to discuss tonight, but they might wonder, well, if the fish were out there in the ocean, you got freshwater and saltwater fish.
Right.
If this is really a global flood, you're going to blend all that water and some of them aren't going to make it. So if that's true, how did they survive? Second thing is, why do I still have freshwater and saltwater areas on the earth? If this whole thing was covered, shouldn't it all be the same salinity? So it's pretty simple. Where'd that water go, for one? The answer is the water is still here. Okay, there's just a little bit of scripture that talks about mountains, and it's in Psalms, poking up from the deep. So the water just runs off to the low points, right? There's enough water here to cover the entire earth 1.5 miles deep without any problem, okay? If you smooth it out completely. Right. So we have high points that we see on our mountains, continents, things like that. And that's all there is to it. It's still here. It's the same water that everyone drowned in is what we're drinking. Now, as far as the salinity problem, it's pretty simple. If you have a fish tank and you take just say, drop a little bit of salt in there, just a shake of salt, is that going to kill him instantly? No, he's going to be fine. If you put a couple shakes, is that going to kill him? Eventually you get to a point where it's going to kill him. But if you get there slowly, take a couple weeks and increase his salinity a little bit at a time, he's going to be okay. He only has to get up to 4% to match what's out in the oceans. And now he's a saltwater fish. If you remove him from that tank and put him back in freshwater instantly, he's a goner. You got to go slowly in both directions. The salinity of our ocean is still increasing. It's at about 4% and it goes up just from runoff. Okay. Salt commander rocks and things like that. So it's increasing all the time, which might make you wonder, well, if the earth is old, I mean, how high should the saltwater percentage be at this point if there have been millions of years of contribution to it? The answer is a lot saltier. Okay. We still have freshwater though, because some of it doesn't get the same amount of runoff that the ocean does. There's just different speeds of it. And technically our freshwater has a little bit of salt in it, just not as much. So when people act like this is a problem, it isn't.
Right. And I've seen videos and pictures of like out in the middle of the ocean where you can see a clear dividing line and like they're different colors too. And the reason is because they don't mix because they're different levels of salt. So I don't
Never seen that.
Yeah. You can look it up, look on a video on YouTube. I don't think during the flood, maybe not all of the water mixed to have the exact same level of salt.
I don't know what would have partitioned or how it would have happened exactly, but all I can tell you is there's just no problem for the age of the earth, creation, those kinds of things from it. Not to mention this, the evolutionist usually jumps on adaptations. Things can adapt. We're like, yeah, but that's innate. It's programmed by God. So you know what? If it did, then thank him for letting it do that and survive, because guess what? It was programmed into its genetics before it had an opportunity to ever find that situation.
Yeah. One of the things is too that on the point of like animals on the ark, this was really interesting. I'll see if I can find it and we'll put the video in the show notes. But it was a video by some skeptic scientist guy who like actually did the math. And he admitted that like if you take the numbers for the ark, it actually all fits and it works.
Yeah.
And then he was like, well, but it wouldn't work because to have enough species, you'd have to have, he was like, well, if you make it like 100 animals per each, then it wouldn't fit, because it was like, well, yes, that's not what it says though. So
yeah, it says kinds, not species.
Yeah.
These guys will always dodge the obvious to try to be correct.
Right.
There's a lot of space left over on the ark because remember, you can't just have the animals. You have to be able to feed them.
Right.
And it takes a lot. And so the ark, if you look at the dimensions, it is far larger than what they needed just to fit the animals.
That's another reason why baby animals make sense. You feed them less as well.
It's true.
And it's totally, like you said, God led the animals there. So whether Noah, had that wisdom from God or not, when he saw a bunch of baby animals lining up to go in the ark, he's like, this works out well for me.
Yeah. I just hope those lions are going to stay nice.
Yeah. So this was another one, which is perhaps one of the longest running questions. This question comes from courtesy of St. Augustine from the 4th century AD, who, when he was writing his commentary on Genesis, had a lot of questions about where did the light come from? Because the stars come up on day 3? I believe stars show up on day 3. And before that, on days 1 and 2, it says there was morning and evening. And where did the light come from before then? And what's that?
Preceded, the light preceded the sun, right? So we look at the sun as the source for light.
Right.
Consider this. Everything has a dependency on God. God's the only thing that has no dependency, right? When you look at the burning bush, it's not consumed. God is self everything. He doesn't depend on us. Light requires a source. We require something like that. God is able to make something and be the source of it, just like anything else. For him to somehow condense it into sun for us and then make it into what's understandable for a day and a night is something he did so that we would know when to rest. It can exist without the sun. I'll give you an example of something really quickly. If I point my flashlight out into space tonight, turn it on, and then I turn it off. It's been on for a second. Okay. And I've got this beam that's shooting out there. This thing's 1,000,000 miles long. Okay. It just continues to run out there, but its source is gone. So in other words, what created it has been turned off. My flashlight is no longer on, but that light is still traveling without its source. It will do that until it's either reflected or absorbed. That's what photons will do. So technically, they need something to get them going, but they don't need something to sustain them thereafter, right? They just go until they're absorbed, right? So the sun is simply the source that he gave to it. It can exist without the sun. He can create it just by saying, let there be. Now, how he made it an evening and a morning, right? The first day without the sun. Apparently, it wasn't dependent at that time on the rotation of the planet. Okay. Apparently, it's nighttime, it's daytime. Remember, this is the God who made the sun stand still. Don't forget, he can manipulate these things by just saying so. They depend on him, not the other way around.
So when it says evening and morning, then it's not like standard rotations of the Earth. In the first, I checked, it was day 4 is when the stars were created, not day 3. So during those first 3 days, when it says evening and morning, it wasn't calculated by Earth does one rotation, that's one day. It would have just been God just decreeing the light to exist.
Apparently he turned it on or off, something like that. He's basically saying that it's not a different time period. I don't want to get off track and make anyone think that, for example, these days might have been billions of years or something like that, which is obviously where people would like to go with it. But nonetheless, Jesus said, are there not 12 hours in the day? He was referring to the daylight portion when he made that comment. And so it must have been a 12-hour day and a 12-hour night, hence our 24. And that's just what it is.
You see, even in the very beginning, let there be light. It was the first thing. Yeah. Right. It was day one.
Light was created first.
But you also see, and I think this would be the best answer to that question, is what we see in heaven at the end, right? Which is in Revelation 21. It says, and the city has no need of the sun or of the moon to shine on it, for the glory of God has illumined it, and its lamp is the Lamb. The nations walk by its light, and the kings of the earth will bring their glory into it. So we see that God illumines the entire dimension by his own glory. Right. And so we can see that he clearly has that ability, as Gavin's talking about. He is the source he can be the source of anything without causing another source for it. So I think the best way to visualize or imagine or understand what that may have been like at the very beginning is similar to what is explained in Revelation 21 about what we will see heaven like.
And to add to that, just a little quick note, like we saw, like in Genesis explaining, we have light, yet there's no sun. We also see the exact opposite. And during the crucifixion, we have the sun, but there's no light. Luke 23, verse 44, it was now about the 6th hour, and darkness fell over the whole land until the 9th hour, because the sun was obscured and the veil of the temple was torn in two.
Right.
So it was dark over the whole earth, yet the sun was still there.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I mean, the question is not so much like how did the light exist, because that's really easy. God said so. The question is sort of like how does days and timekeeping work when it's clearly not like Earth spinning on its axis timekeeping. But by the way, also this is the other thing, people will be like, oh, so see, St. Augustine would have believed in evolution. No, actually he believed that creation, he was wrong, but he believed that creation was instantaneous. So you don't stop trying to. He believed that because of this problem and a couple of others, he believed that all of chapter 1 was done instantaneously and that it was explained over 6 days for our puny human brains to understand. But in neither case was he was like, well, I guess that means it's a 1 billion year long day.
It's crazy. If you have any person who's never read that book or heard this topic before, pick it up and read it and go, okay, tell me what it says. Not one of them go, what? I think what he meant by that was billions of years. That takes someone who has been derailed already to start trying to chop it apart. It's the cult leader who says, I can explain to you what that thing really means, right? The plain verbiage that God meant to be understood by the ordinary guy who picked up and read it just isn't good enough. You've got to have me to explain this to you.
Yeah.
And so, when you just read it, what we're looking for, and this gets into the topic of how we interpret the Bible, but what we're always after is authorial intent. What did the author intend to convey by what he said? And to use verbiage like the first day, the second day, not one day as some translations done, but the second, the first, the third, right? Whatever. An evening and a morning were the first day. He wants us to equate this with what we know a day to be like. And then anywhere else it's referenced, Jesus says, are there not 12 hours in a day? Things like that. The only place you'll ever see the word day used where it doesn't refer to a 24-hour period would be like if you talk about in the day of, Ernest, refers to your lifespan. And that's different. That's not how they're using it here, obviously. The other thing is it comes up often. If anybody wants to look up the scripture reference it, I can't think of where it's found, but it talks about to the Lord, a day is 1,000 years.
Yeah.
And 1,000 years is as one day. So people look at that and go, okay, well, a day is as 1,000 years. Okay, so maybe we're not in the millions, but we're in thousands. That means something different, doesn't it? And the Bible does say that, doesn't it? Yeah, well, if you read that by itself, it'd be a little confusing. But the next sentence says, and 1,000 years is as one day. What's the point? God is saying, I am not in time. I am not limited by this. This is my creation. Okay. I made time for you. In other words, I'm unaffected by it.
Right.
So to me, a day is 1,000 years. 1,000 years is as a day. I'm not sitting here waiting, patiently waiting, hoping one day you guys will all catch up in time. He's in heaven, able to see from where he sits the moment you were born, right now in full detail, and when you die, whenever that is, and where we're sitting currently. God has this bird's eye view that we can't even describe of all that's happening. Mm-hmm. So 1,000 years is a day is 1,000 years. He's not affected by time. That's all he's telling us.
Right. And Braden, I think you probably remember this verse. It's where he talks about, I believe it's in Exodus, where he says that for God rested on the Sabbath day, and it talks about it as clearly in that point a singular day. I don't know if you remember that verse, but that verse is the same thing, where it connects back to creation, and that verse is explicitly, nobody disputes it, a single calendar day.
Yeah, right.
And is connecting it directly back to creation.
Well, I'll tell you, if you ever want to have some fun, go intentionally misunderstand what a day is and take anybody else's phony interpretation and then apply it widely and see if you use that logic exactly what happens. Because if days and years don't mean what you think they mean, suddenly you've got people who are 5 years old giving birth in the Bible and all kinds of problems pop up. Going, that can't be it. It's like, yeah, exactly. Don't do that. It's either all or nothing in this case. You got to go with context, and it's king. So,
yeah. So, Gavin, I've got another dating question. This one is tree ring dating. So, I always, growing up, was told that when you cut a tree in half, you look at the rings, and however many rings it has, that's how old it is. One ring equals 1 year. So, people have done that with certain trees, and they've seen 10,000 rings. So trees that are 10,000 years old. So that would say, okay, Earth isn't 6,000 years old. How would you explain that?
This one's actually pretty simple. Tree ring dating is just not an exact science. It's been treated as one. They say 1 ring is 1 year. Sometimes you get a few rings in the same year. Sometimes it's slower than that. What it depends on is a whole bunch of external factors, right? If you have a rainy season, if you have a dry season, what the temperature's like, a whole bunch of things affect it. And so it's interesting. If the oldest tree they've found, if they're assuming it is, has 10,000 rings on it, and you're plus or minus, say, 33% here and there based on what we've observed, that tree might just be accelerated a little bit in its ringing. That's all there is to it. And so it still fits in close to about the 6,000 year mark. It's funny, if someone wanted to, I guess, debate me that it was older than 6,000, but their conclusion was it was 10,000, I guess I'd give them a hug and say, let's find something else to fight about.
Mm. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess the interesting thing about tree rings is even if that gets brought up, the tree rings, like you said, the oldest ones are 10,000 years. So it doesn't really get you where the evolution want to go anyway. It's okay, fine. There's an extra 4,000 years.
Yeah.
Oh no.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not sitting here saying it's 6,200 years and 5 days or something. If they get some evidence that's around 10,000, it's probably wrong. Okay. But still, it's not the length of time they need to get evolution.
Yeah. It's not even close. So
we don't depend on the age of the earth for anything anyway. We don't depend on it for how we, use, any of our technology, that kind of stuff. It's literally a religious aspect of belief for those who have taken the religion of evolution. That's all it is.
For us, the doctrine of creation is very important. The exact number of calendar days since Adam and Eve were created, as long as we're not putting death before sin, we're not getting into dangerous ground. Right.
Right.
So, Gavin, I have a question about a fossil that was found, or multiple fossils that were found. This genus that was found is called the Sahelanthropus, and it is apparently a quote unquote a genus of extinct humanoids that lived around 7 million years ago. And so it has humanoid features to it. It walked upright. It had supposedly a smaller brain size. They were found in Africa. They had cranium. They had jaw fragments and teeth that were found. But scientists say that it looked like a mix between a human and an ape, but mostly humanoid. And they found these fossils buried deep beneath the earth. Yeah. What could possibly be the reasoning for that, or the explanation for that?
The first thing I'd say is that we don't really care what scientists say. We care about what they know, because they're entitled to opinions also. They just have to make sure that they keep those things separate. When they're confident of something, it's different than being 100% sure about it.
Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm. And I've been completely wrong about things I was confident of. In fact, most everything in my life up to the point I was saved. Okay. Now, these do have distinct features that are a little bit different, but I want to put the emphasis here on a little bit different than the rest of us. You will see people who look different than you. Okay. You'll see people who come from other places far away where they've had, I'm not trying to be disrespectful to them, but there's a lot of inbreeding, certain tribes and things like that, where a very pronounced feature becomes kind of the normal thing. Mm-hmm. So jaws that are very elongated, eyebrows that are very protruded, things like that. And if you look at the Sahelanthropus, hopefully we said that correct, it has this protruding eyebrow, kind of like what they've called Neanderthals. Now, this particular one, I think, was one of 9 that were found. But to me, that just looks like a family of odd-looking humans. Yeah. When they want to start telling a story about, how it probably used to dwell in trees, but it was the first of its kind to walk bipedally, they don't know that. You're making up a story and telling people, well, this is what scientists believe. Okay, well, don't speak for all of them, because guess what? Most of them don't. And anybody who has a brain larger than that thing they found also knows that it probably didn't. Yeah. Okay. Mm-hmm. So here's what we know about, from the Bible. There were giants. Okay. Mm-hmm. We talk about, there's Nephilim that are mentioned, right? This somehow it seems like a cross between angel and human. Mm-hmm. And odds are they looked a little bit different. Mm-hmm. To me, that's evidence. If they call it humanoid, I don't know what interesting word, but the point is that may be exactly what they're referring to. Humans, nonetheless. We look at, for example, in these Neanderthals, they've got this couple features. One is they're somewhat bow-legged. Okay, that can happen to ordinary people who ride horses. It can also be a feature of, having suffered through rickets. Yeah. That can happen to you there too. Mm-hmm. So it's not necessarily something exclusive to, a different type of human being. Yeah. The other thing is these protruding eyebrows. You'll notice that on some people just naturally, if they're on human growth hormone, then we're going full speed, they get these huge protruding eyebrows, large hands, other features like that. Mm-hmm. But the point is, it can happen to humans. I've heard this debated. I've been told that the eyebrow, that ridge of the eyebrow is a part of the bone that doesn't ever stop growing. So if you had people who lived 800 or 900 years, you'd expect to see it very protruded. I've heard other people say, no, that's not the case. I'm like, look, I don't really care. We're not talking about a different kind of person here, a different kind of animal. We're still talking about a human, and there's some people who have really odd looking features. Okay, I'm sitting in front of 3 of them right now. So it is possible. Yeah. Right? The other thing is we found some of these Neanderthals wearing chainmail. Armor. We know, we know that they dabbled in art. We know that they were into music. Okay, these are very human features. They aren't things you find. They talk about just bipedalism, like that they can walk on 2 feet. Okay, yeah, that's because they're human. This isn't anything to be surprised by. What they're trying to do is find an intermediary fossil, which they're desperate
What about for. I've heard, I don't know a lot about this. You'll notice both my questions were exegetical ones, because I don't actually know that much about creation science, but I do remember hearing from time to time that there will be science headlines about how, we have found X% of Neanderthal DNA in humans. So when they say Neanderthal DNA, I assume that means they're making some sort of claim that they can separate, and they can say that Neanderthals have some sort of unique DNA set.
Yeah, they are making that claim. That's exactly what the claim is they're making. The problem is it's total nonsense. You can't, we're talking about getting information from bones. What you can extract DNA-wise is extremely limited. So if they want to say, hey, this has features that we find in humans, well, gosh, do you think it's because they might be humans? I'm looking at this going, you have this alternate explanation for everything you guys came up with instead of just the obvious one. Yeah, you find a skull underneath the Carboniferous era. Was it buried? Not by humans. Yeah, it was buried, but guess what? By hydrologic sorting. They just try to find the alternative to being judged in everything. It's really simple.
Yeah. There's also, especially when we see scientists archaeologists dig up and find these skeletons that look like humans but slightly different. We have to remember that a lot of cultures and societies believed in these and followed these very tribal and pagan ceremonies and different acts, where we see in modern day Africa where they will bend and manipulate their bones even from growth for whatever reasons, as it's part of their tribal thing.
Neck elongation,
right?
feet
There's
binding.
neck elongation. There's even forehead elongation or head elongation, where they will wrap something around the child's head even as a kid, and by the time they're an adult, they've got an egg shaped or banana shaped almost head, or plates in the lips, giant things like that. It wouldn't have been, these practices now wouldn't have been any different a few thousand years ago. Mm-hmm. What that is it's Satan interfering with people's lives and causing religions that destroy the body that God created perfectly.
100%. It'd be hard for somebody who picked up a bone that had this manipulation done to it to know for certain whether or not it had been intentionally manipulated or if it just grew that way. It might be kind of hard to tell. There may be some ways to tell, but absolutely, there's a lot of stuff out there like that.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll leave it on that question. Again, listeners, if you have any questions that come up, please send us an email. We'd love to respond to you guys and get back to you on those things. We thank you for joining us on this episode in this series of the It Stands Written podcast. And Lord willing, we will see you on the next one.